Hello, and it's a warm welcome and great to have Investec back with us for another episode of What's Next. And we're going to be talking about business banking security. Now, I've got a business account. Many of us have got online banking accounts, and it evokes a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety in all of us, right? Because security is so paramount into protecting your money. We get joined by Kevin Hogan, who's the head of fraud risk at Investec. And we're also joined by Thivian Moodley, who's head of product. And just a bit of background on both our gentlemen. Kevin's been in the business for 21 years. He's been in banking, starting out with another bank many years ago. He's worked for different departments as a credit analyst, and then he was part of the first retail banking fraud prevention team, which he led until 2009. So he's been really, really busy looking at security within banking. And Thivian Moodley is head of product and pricing and client value proposition at Investec, looking at traditional products and solutions. And he's also the head of product and development for Investec, looking at those transactional products and solutions and really unlocking that client value proposition at Investec Bank. And he's responsible for building and launching the Investec Business Transactional Banking platform to business and corporate clients. And as I said, we're going to be talking about this very important topic about business banking security. Firstly, gents, how are you guys doing?
Doing good, thank you, Aki.
Very well, thank you, Aki.
I'm surprised how calm you both are, considering the massive responsibilities that you have on your backs, guys. But let me start off with you, Kevin. When you look at the current backdrop of security and everything, and it's something that I follow with a great deal of interest, it doesn't seem to be slowing down. The bad guys are finding innovative ways of trying to get into systems and defraud people and do horrible things. And I cannot tell you, just in the last 24 hours, how many random requests I've had over WhatsApp and Telegram to provide me with this code that you will get an SMS for. And it's such an obvious thing that somebody has sent a recover password and you're getting an SMS to say this is your recovery code. Like bizarre things, but people fall into those traps, right? Because it's so realistic. So can you provide insight into the state of security in digital banking currently based on the changing cybersecurity landscape? Because boy, oh boy, is it changing rapidly, right?
So Aki, really, I think when people talk about online banking security, the underlying assumption is always that the frauds are changing drastically, that the chess pieces are moving very quickly, and that the banks, from a technology perspective, are having to shift very quickly. And this is simply not true. So let me give you a typical example. One of the most used moduses in the world, not just South Africa, is phishing. Okay, this is where you get a fake SMS or a fake email saying that your subscription has expired at maybe like a Netflix, and that you need to update your banking details. And people will then click on the link, and it takes them to the bank's login screen, or it takes you to a screen that's asking you for your credit card information. And what's interesting about these scams is it's got nothing to do with the technology that the bank is providing. The bank's security is really good. And as a result of those security protocols being so good, the weak part in the link is the human being. And this is who the fraudsters are targeting. It's what we call in my line of work social engineering. So the individual, the human being, is being socially engineered to do something on their computer, on their online banking profile that they ordinarily wouldn't do. So the fraudsters are orchestrating what people will do because they can't get around the security. It's very hard to try and crack someone's password, especially if they've got a nice long one, 15, 20 characters. The one-time PIN is going to their cell phone. The cell phone is registered on the bank's banking platform. So only that cell phone can be used. So all these obstacles that the banks have put in the way are very difficult to bypass. So what do we see? The human being is being targeted, not the technology. And this is akin to most of the online digital frauds that we're seeing.
Okay, it's interesting. In your personal life, though, when you see somebody trying to do some social engineering, what do you do? What kind of question? I always approach it with a great deal of skepticism, right? When somebody's asking me some strange questions, what do you do personally when people try and do this to you?
So, Aki, I'm actually the exception to the rule because what I've tried to do is I've tried to put myself in a position where I don't get the phone calls, I don't get the SMSs. So I'm an extreme outlier. You're probably going to think I'm totally psychotic, but let me give you an example. Your cell phone number is akin to your ID number. Most of us have had the same cell phone number 15, 20, 25, 30 years in some cases. So that can be linked to who you are. And what people don't realize is that they're giving away information that can be used to attack them, like your cell phone number, for example. So you sign in at a complex and you put in your cell phone number. You open up a contract at a shop for whatever, put in your cell phone number. So your cell phone number is out there. A lot of companies deal in private information legitimately, and they sell your information to each other for marketing purposes. But then obviously you've had all these online hacks. A lot of the major bureaus have been hacked. A lot of the government departments have been hacked. So all your real information, your name, your surname, your ID number, your cell phone, all that stuff, your email address, all that stuff is in the open. Okay. So really what you want to do is you say, well, how do I be selfish with my information so that I don't get all these emails all the time? I don't get these unsolicited SMSs all the time. And really what you've got to start to understand is if you don't want to get that stuff, you have to take some measures to prevent that from happening. So let me give an example. I'm paranoid, obviously, because of the type of work that I do. So I actually have 2 email addresses, for example, in my personal life. I have one email address that everyone gets. So if you need an email address to send me an invoice or to do something with me, that's the email address that you get all the time. But then I have a second email address, which I give no one. No one ever has that email address, ever. And what I've done in my first email address is I've created rules. And in those rules, I've said, for example, I want that email address to send my second email address my son's school invoice, all the transactional stuff from the bank I want to see. I want to see my cell phone invoice from the South. And so what I do is I cherry pick what gets sent to my real email, and that's the only thing I check. So that's just, I think I'm the extreme use case, absolutely, because this is what I do for a living. But what it really boils down to is that the man in the street is just giving out his information, and people need to learn to be very circumspect about their information and try to keep it as private as possible. And you would avoid all these different things. But to answer your original question, when I do from time to time get these things, because I've been doing it for a while, I literally don't even engage with that stuff. I literally just delete it and I carry on with my life. So whether it be an SMS or a phishing email, I know it's not legitimate. I know it's not supposed to, be for me. It's got a link in it. If I click on that link, it's going to send me to a screen that asks me for my username and password. So I literally just delete them and ignore them. I don't even engage.
Okay. Well, listen, you know what? I thought I was the only paranoid one because I've got 3 email addresses just to top up on yours there. The third one I use for all my kind of social media and online gaming platforms, that kind of stuff, But okay, so that's a very interesting backdrop. Before we go to Thivian, I want to ask you, what are the biggest cybersecurity threats for 2024? What are you seeing? I certainly on my side, and I'm a consumer, I'm seeing a lot more phishing attacks happening this year. Well, there were many last year, but they've become more sophisticated and they're a lot smarter in how they approach things. What are you seeing as threats this year?
So agreed. Phishing is still right up there. The SMS version of phishing is called smishing, so that's right up there. But the other thing that we're seeing quite heavily is what we call, and I'm sorry, you might think I'm pulling your leg, but it's telephone fraud, and that's called vishing with a V. And what we're finding is that 3, 4, 5 years ago, telephone fraud wasn't an issue in this country. We were seeing it in our UK business, but not in South Africa. Fast forward, 3, 4 years, vishing fraud has taken off unbelievably, where people are getting calls from people pretending to be from their bank. They're saying to them they're from the fraud department. There's been a fraudulent transaction. Please, can you do this and this? So we've seen vishing take off exponentially. The other thing that's really concerning us is deepfakes. So what I mean by deepfakes is what we call synthetic voice. So where a computer or a bot is emulating your voice, or synthetic face, where they are pretending to be you using your face. And the problem with this is that, if you're a bank and you want to engage with your client, or you maybe want to engage with a new client, for example, we did that during COVID. in order to KYC a client, because we couldn't physically see you, our stopgap was, well, let's have a Teams call with you so that we can see you and engage with you. Now, if you've got a deep fake presenting themselves as Mr. X, and we now think we're talking to Mr. X because potentially we've seen a copy of his ID and he sent us his KYC documents, we might believe that we're talking to the real Mr. X. So this is worldwide. A huge concern for us is deep fakes. So synthetic voice, where they're using your voice to talk to you on the phone. You don't know if you're talking to the real Thivian or Aki. Synthetic face, you don't know if you're talking to the real Aki or Thivian. And if you just go onto YouTube and you just Google it to say, show me a deep fake, the stuff is phenomenally good. And really, that's also, we're seeing a lot of CEOs and senior executives abroad being targeted, where potentially the fraudsters are phoning a person in the bank pretending to be the CEO, and they're talking to them literally on WhatsApp or Teams or whatever the case may be. So from a new technology perspective, it's this deep fake AI generative stuff that is really new on the landscape that's going to change the game for all of us.
Wow. So we got phishing, we got smishing, we got vishing, and we got fakes, deep fakes as well. I mean, what's coming next? I mean, it's scary out there. And I guess coming to you, Thivian Moodley, this is one thing. I guess your clients, you give them that reassurance that Investec is on top of their game when it comes to security. But talk to me about product and payments. How do you see the client value proposition for business evolving into the future? And I guess that part of that whole evolution, security is paramount to that, right?
Yeah. Aki, exactly that. I think, one of the big components when it comes to risk for business client is obviously the very entertaining stuff that Kevin has told us about, but it's also about the fundamentals of business. So I think what's going to become very important going forward is a trusted brand with a deep balance sheet. Particularly if you look at from a banking risk perspective, you got depositor insurance coming out. So you really want to engage with a bank that has a very strong balance sheet, a brand that you can trust, because in the last couple of years we've had some financial institutions that have failed, right? And that's another thing businesses have to really have to think about in their banking partner. Is a strong trusted brand. So I think that's part of the value proposition that Investec offers, is a very strong balance sheet and a trusted brand. From a secondary value proposition perspective, and I think this is very important in the business banking market, is the client service and experience. And that comes from two parts. And Kevin, it's one of the things that we have to balance at a bank. We have to balance customer experience and security and fraud. And I think, banks, we're always playing that balancing act, because to really make your banking impenetrable will make an horrendous customer experience, really impact the operations of a client. And I think it's about creating that balance. And in saying that, I think one of the key differentiators in business banking is the ability to take a client's delegation of authority into the banking system, because that's another part of risk management. It's like, if I have a payment up to R1 million, I need the financial manager to initiate it, and I need the financial director to approve it. And I think that's very important in business banking, is how the banking system can take your delegation of authority, which you as a business have thought a lot about. There's a reason you put it in place. It's how you manage your risk and your fraud in a business. And how does your banking system support that? I think it's important. Now, from an Investec perspective, we have a very flexible way to cater for a lot of businesses' delegation of authority into the banking system. And it really enhances the client's mitigation of risk and fraud in their business. And I think that's important. And we use digital technology to help make that client experience as seamless as possible. One example of that, Aki, is the ability to authorize on the Investec Business app. So if you think about from a client experience perspective, particularly the people that need to authorize, they're busy people. They're in sales meetings, they're in the golf course, they're traveling, but they still need a secure method to authorize banking transactions. And that we allow via the app, which is then, obviously, Kevin can chat more to this. It's then protected with biometrics, which is a very I think, a very strong authentication mechanism.
Okay, it's a fine balance, right, of that customer experience going online and also the different layers of security, because they're important, right? But you've got to have them, because then you make yourself less vulnerable. But coming back to you, Kevin, what are those indispensable security tools for business banking teams today?
Well, I think, Aki, if you look at all the banks, there are certain elements that we are all doing that are the same. It's almost like your bread and butter stuff. So it's username and password, it's two-step verification, all of that. But I think there are two components that potentially we as a bank do a little bit differently. Number one, client education is key. If your client doesn't know what's out there, what's possible, what's going on, they'll be socially engineered this side of Sunday. So what we try to do at the bank is we try to engage clients around these topics. So, we have monthly fraud awareness newsletters that go out. We do face-to-face engagements, especially in Thivian's world. We do a lot of face-to-face engagement. I'm in Cape Town this weekend. All we're doing is doing face-to-face engagements at conferences, at business, forums, where this is what I talk about. Talk about phishing and the risk of phishing and how you need to do 2FA and, have long passwords. So, one of the greatest drivers of fraud is, let's use your cell phone as an example. Most people only have a 6-digit password to get into their cell phone. Okay. And then if your cell phone gets stolen or snatched, you wonder, how did they get into my cell phone? It's because your password was rubbish. It was only 6 characters. And people think, it's a 6-character password, or I've got facial recognition. No one can get into my phone. That is simply not true. If you look at some of the computing, power that is available today, your passwords need to be 15, 20 characters at least. But people are lazy. No one wants to create a 20-character password to get into their phone because it's not convenient. So to Thivian's point, our focus as a bank is to balance this convenience versus security element. So for us, the two main drivers really are, it's this education component. And then to Thivian's, what he said earlier is, what are the value propositions that we're offering that are different to the foundational things? And it's what he's spoken about. It's a huge saver in our business banking environment. I can say with a fair amount of pride, the fraud in our business banking environment is virtually non-existent. And one of these authorizer type of functions that he's spoken about is one of the key drivers of that. Because if you get phished or socially engineered, you are now acting behind the laptop to do certain things. The fraudster doesn't know that you don't have the authority to move the money on your own. He now has to socially engineer someone else. And the likelihood of that happening is so tiny that it can't possibly happen. Even if you had a situation where Thivian was the first approver and I was the fraudster and I phished him and I socially engineered him to do stuff, Thivian now still has to go and engage with the second party who has to authorize these payments. And obviously there's a conversation that happens. So it sounds so trivial, but it prevents so much fraud from happening, so much social engineering from happening, and it's not a difficult thing to do. So these are some of the small things that we're trying to do to make this banking piece very convenient, but at the same time, hopefully very secure.
So what does it take to truly balance security and usability while managing risk, especially for mid-market businesses that may not necessarily have that kind of in-house security tech resources that, big organizations do? And I think that's always the challenging question, how do the small guys protect themselves when they don't have the massive budgets the big guys have?
I think it's one of the things that I think we as a bank add value to, is we leave little up to them, and we give them guidelines and procedures on how to set up the necessary steps to limit risk. It always exists, right? So I'll give you an example, right? So we always insist, I wouldn't say insist, I say as a default, we suggest to clients you have at least an initiator and authorizer in the business banking context, right?
Yes.
We do allow for smaller businesses not to. But then that's a client choice. We're and we explain the risk to them, and we tell them, listen, this is the risk you're going to take by having this type of setup. So it's hard. I agree with you. It's hard for smaller businesses. I think we as Investec, again, what we offer to clients is that one-on-one chat about how you should set it up. How do you best mitigate your risk in a company? But again, it's always a client choice. but
Yes.
we're hoping they're making an informed choice.
Okay. And what's your take on that, Kevin? And I guess that whether you're a big guy or a small guy, you still have got to follow the same security protocols, right?
No, I think Thivian's hit the nail on the head. At the end of the day, and you're absolutely right, the 3 or 4 man businesses don't have the money to put in some of these security systems and checks and balances. So what can they do to protect themselves? And the key to this is education. Is talking to the client about the risks and what those risks look like. And we tell them specifically what they are. What does phishing do? How does it work? What are the risks of not having a good password, using the same password on multiple accounts? There is risk that comes with that. And we literally have these conversations with our clients. So we empower them to understand the risk, and they now need to make a choice. Which side of the fence do they want to be on? What we're trying to avoid is you becoming fraud aware and taking these precautions after you've already been a victim of fraud. What we're trying to do is give you everything you need to stop that from happening in the first place.
Okay. And Thivian, talking about business banking, what are the focus areas that you guys are looking at Investec when it comes to business banking right now?
So, Aki, I think after doing a lot of research in this mid-market segment for business banking, the one thing that has been it's lagged behind the large corporate space is what we call host-to-host banking or bank integrations, right? And the benefit it has to security there, Kevin mentioned it earlier. You always look for the weakest point in the chain. Now, without host-to-host integration, you have businesses that have these ERP systems where they do their accounting, generates their payroll file, payments files, and so on. Now, the normal standard in the mid-market business banking segment is they download it from the ERP system and then they upload it into the banking system. The weak point there is that someone's downloaded that payment file onto their laptop. So they could change numbers, change accounts. So even though they're uploading the banking system, and this is now internal fraud risk, within the organization itself, it's that employee actually fidgeting with the file in this part, right? This is where banking integration becomes very important for businesses, helps them to reduce risk. It's where you auth the payment file in the ERP system and you directly integrate that payment file into the bank. So there's no human intervention between the payment file being created in the ERP system to getting into the banking system. And I think that is the large focus for the mid-market segment. And why has it been a feature that has lacked in the business banking segment? Because traditionally, it was very hard. It required, as you mentioned earlier, Aki, it required you to have deep technical knowledge and experience in technology. It had very complex host-to-host protocols to integrate this. Modern technology like Open API has made that easier for smaller clients to integrate to your ERP system. And I think that will be the large focus in business banking going forward. It does two things for me. The one is it reduces risk, internal risk, as I mentioned earlier. The second thing it does is it improves efficiency in the company. Because now you're taking out a manual step. It's directly from ERP, and this is both from a payment perspective and from a statement recon perspective. Because even there, you're leaving points of failure for manipulation of a statement, so a client thinks he's being paid and not being paid. So having direct integration removes that risk. And I think that, to me, will be the largest focus in the business banking segment going forward. Just because unlike corporate banking, where host-to-host is the norm in your large corporates, listed companies, it has never been the norm in the business banking mid-market segment. And I think that will become the norm in 5-10 years' time.
Now, look,
it's something we as Investec are really focusing on.
Well, one of the things that you're focusing on a lot, by the sounds of it, is payments, because there seems to be a lot of change in the payment space. Can you touch on this and expand on this? Because you mentioned it just now, but boy, oh boy, payments are no longer the traditional way of doing things. That certainly is a lot of change happening in this space.
Yeah, it is by far one of the most exciting areas to be in banking at the moment, payments. And obviously I'm saying that from a space where I'm probably a bit biased, being in the payments game myself, but it's very exciting at the moment. South Africa has always been very proud of historically having one of the better, more sophisticated systems globally. We've always been proud of that, particularly when it came to interoperability. Right? It was very successful. However, I think in the last 10 years, we've had some international jurisdictions that have overtaken us. And you've had UPI in India, you've had PAX in Brazil. The South African equivalent of that is called RPP, the Rapid Payments Program in South Africa, that's running at the moment. That is basically looking at a similar implementation of UPI in India and PAX in Brazil, which has proven immensely successful in that country from two aspects. So one is it's reduced the reliance on cash. That's very important from a risk perspective, right? We know with crime locally and internationally, having cash and running transactions on cash has risk of security risk, physical security risk, both to the merchant and the consumer. It also introduced AML risk, anti-money laundering risk. So there's a lot of risk by having physical cash, right? Now, the innovation in the payments industry through RPP, one of its main goals is to create greater financial inclusion and start reducing the reliance on cash. And by definition then, reducing the security risk behind it from an AML perspective, from a pure security threat perspective, right? Mm-hmm. Now, RPP is a fascinating program. The industry has broken that up into three larger products, and it has a dual meaning, RPP. So the first one is rapid payment, which the industry has marketed as PayShop. So it's 24/7, it's real time, 10 seconds from payer to pay in pay bank account. Now, if you think about that, if you want to get rid of cash, you have to have something that's available 24/7, that is almost immediate, and 10 seconds is basically real time into account. So it covers that. The second component of RPP is what we call pay by proxy. Now, proxy resolves two issues. The one is, traditionally, it's very hard for you to remember, or not hard, it's harder for you to remember your bank account and branch account to give everyone. And to Kevin's point earlier, it's probably something that you must be quite protective of, giving my bank account details to everyone, right? So proxy allows you to tell someone to pay my cell phone number, right? And all they do in the banking system is input your cell phone number. In the background, that's actually linked to like an Investec bank account. And that does two things for a client. It allows the client to switch bank accounts without having to inform every person paying them. So in the background, they switch the routing from Standard Bank to Investec. So when that person pays the cell phone number, it automatically routes the money to Investec. So pay by proxy is a very important thing. It also introduced greater user experience at other points of payment, like paying at a till. Going forward, I can just put my cell phone number into the POS device, and then it allows me to initiate a transaction just to my cell phone number to close a till deal without having cash on me. The third part of RPP is what we call request to pay. Now, request to pay is where I can send someone a request to pay me directly. Now, again, from a fraud risk perspective, and both pay by proxy and request to pay, the bank is telling you who you're paying. Now, Kevin mentioned earlier, deep fakes, right? So yes. The benefit of pay by proxy and RTP is that the bank is telling you this account actually belongs to Kevin. It's not now the client the fraudster telling you you're paying SARS and this is the new account. The bank is telling you, so when you pay by proxy, it does what it calls a proxy resolution first. So it goes and it comes back to you and say, you're about to pay Kevin Hogan, are you happy to proceed? So, and that's coming from the bank. So the bank uses FICA processes, so generally you can rely on it more than you'd rely on just doing a push payment yourself. On an RTP payment, if you have to pay MTN, it tells you MTN is requesting 1,000 Rand payment for your contract. Again, you guaranteed that the payment is from MTN because the bank is sending it to you with a FICA name behind it. And that reduces a lot of risk. And so it will fundamentally change the landscape from a risk and fraud perspective. It will also fundamentally help reduce cash, which by itself is very risky from a security perspective and an AML perspective.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. And it's just like, reinforcing a person's identity, And I mean, coming back to you, Kevin, when we're talking about reinforcing security and all of these changes that are happening around us that Thivian's been talking about, and the payments, etc., how do we reinforce security amidst this massive banking transformation that's taking place?
Well, Aki, the answer is actually much simpler than you think it is, because the technology is advancing. but the way that we engage with technology has never changed. And so we've seen it. I've been doing this for over 20 years. Phishing has been the modus forever. The vishing has been the modus forever. The smishing has been the modus forever. None of that has changed. So even though the technology has advanced exponentially, the core focus has always been the human being. So the tact has just changed. I used to manipulate the human being by doing X. Now I'm going to manipulate the human being by doing Y. But the technology itself is not driving the fraud. It's the human being. Because remember, the technology is just getting better. I mean, for example, there's a lot of work and noise being done in the industry to get rid of passwords. You want to get to a point where you're in a passwordless environment. So is it facial biometrics? Is it voice biometrics? Whatever that case may be. Let me give an example of how good voice biometrics is. So we have voice biometrics here at Investec. In the fraud industry, we talk about false positive rates. Every time you detect a fraud, how many legitimate transactions have to take place before you pick up a fraud? Okay. And in our voice biometric environment, it's north of 1 million. Okay. So wow. We have over 1 million phone calls before we ever pick up a block of fraud. So the system is that good. Okay. So it is absolutely brilliant at picking it. And it is our core security feature that if you call us on voice biometrics, we can help you do anything because we know that it's you. Okay. So
even with phishing and people replicating your voice.
So what's really cool is that technology has synthetic voice detection. We have synthetic voice detection. So and most of the guys who use the technology do. We know that it's a bot trying to con us. So it'll pick it up and it'll tell us it's a bot. And so the whole point, it really goes back down to the core. It doesn't matter how the technology accelerates. It's the human being that you have to educate and that you have to make aware of what's going on. So, for example, Thivian spoke about RPP. So now you're paying a cell phone number. As fraud practitioner with my industry colleagues, when we gave input into the design of this program, the only answer we had to come up with was, how can the fraudsters manipulate the human being using this new service? And that's the lens that we use to come up with, systems and detection and all sorts of things to say, do we know that it's the real human being doing this transaction? Do we know that it's going to the real bank account? And so the focus is always going to be the human being. The technology is sound. There is nothing wrong with the technology. And this is why the focus from fraudsters is the human. And this is what we're trying to get right, is that the average man in the street is aware of, silly example. Should I tap my card at a terminal or should I insert it? Just something that very basic. Do they know the difference? Which one is more secure? Which one is not? And if we can get the human being to understand each security offering that the bank has a very specific purpose and can do certain things for you, and you should know how to use them. And that education component overall, regardless of the cool stuff that Thivian builds, for me personally, and I think most of my fraud colleagues would agree, is to focus on the human being.
Wow. Listen, guys, this is such a fascinating discussion. It's such an important discussion, and I've learned so much talking to the two of you. So Kevin Hogan, Head of Fraud Risk at Investec, Thivian Moodley, who's the Head of Product Pricing and Client Value Proposition at Investec Transactional Products and Solutions. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion here on What's Next and sharing your valuable insights. It's really much appreciated.
Thank you, Aki.
Thank you, Aki.